Hey guys, this video is for sophomores, Sophomore US. It was really good seeing you today. So I've decided I'm not going to do a special video for Monday, the day that we don't have school. So this is for Friday. So hopefully you're watching it on Friday. And then I'm going to do another video for your asynchronous day on Wednesday, and then we'll have class again on Thursday. So we'll have today's video, and then we're going to have a video for Wednesday. All right, so we left off in class talking about the Bank of the United States, how Jackson vetoed a recharter of the Bank of the United States, because, he hated the bank, reflecting a lot of feeling that a lot of Westerners like Jackson had negative feelings about the Bank of the United States, which they felt took advantage of regular farmers, of regular people. Skepticism about these big Eastern institutions like the bank that they felt were completely unaccountable, even though the biggest customer for the Bank of the United States was the U.S. government, but it seemed completely unaccountable to the government. Or to the people. So Jackson was actually on the people's side, or at least he took the side of a majority of the American people when he vetoed the recharter of the bank. Henry Clay, remember, miscalculated because he thought the bank was a lot more popular than it was. So that's why he passed an early recharter of the bank, even though the old one still had 4 years left on it. But he thought he would be provoking a conflict with Jackson that would actually be to Clay's advantage, because he felt the bank was more popular than it was. But Jackson vetoing a recharter of the bank was actually a very popular move, and it actually helped Jackson win re-election. Now, Jackson took his re-election in 1832 as a sign that the public was on his side with regard to his war on the bank. Now, why was the Bank of the United States such an important issue anyway? The reason is because the Bank of the United States was integral to the U.S. economy. The government did not issue paper money at the time, so the Bank of the United States was really the only one that did that. So the thing is that, and they fluctuated the up, moderated the ups and downs of a capitalist economy. They issued IOUs and things like that. So the Bank of the United States was very, very important to its supporters, saying if you want a modern economy, you basically have to have a bank, a central bank. To its critics, like people like Jackson, they felt it was just a totally unaccountable institution. It took advantage of regular people, was corrupt, the mysterious monopoly that had such control over American life, but no one could really understand why it had so much influence. So the thing is that the Bank of the United States feared for its survival, since Jackson had vetoed a recharter of the bank in 1832. So they thought that, they only had a few years left on their old charter. So they had to do something bold in order to get the public's attention and get them to support rechartering the Bank of the United States. But the Bank of the United States, led by Nicholas Biddle, completely miscalculated. Because the thing is that, they thought that if they really put the screws on the economy, if they really put pressure on, then that would actually help their cause. But the Bank of the United States was increasingly losing popularity. The banknotes that it issued, remember, they were the only ones that issued paper money. The banknotes that they issued fluctuated in value a lot. So a lot of people who held the banknotes, like as their paper money, actually saw the value of that paper money go down. So the thing is that the bank was actually not winning any friends, particularly in 1833, when they decided they were going to call in loans early, make people repay them the money that was owed before the people thought that they had to repay. So if they thought they had 5 years to repay, the Bank of the United States, maybe 2-3 years into your loan, demanded full repayment of the loan, which is, very difficult for most people, right? Most people do not have all the money up front in order to pay off loans. So they thought this would put pressure on the government, because now all the people would be like, oh my God, now we have to pay back our loans to the bank because you, Jackson, declared war on the bank. So Jackson, bring back the bank. So they stopped doing these things. So they stopped putting pressure on us. Well, Andrew Jackson Well, the bank thought the people would respond that way. But Andrew Jackson was not the sort of person who was really going to respond to pressure like that. In fact, quite the opposite. Jackson said after the bank called in loans early, he said, "They are trying to kill me. I will kill it." And just knowing anything about Andrew Jackson, anybody who followed his life and career should have known that trying to put pressure on Jackson this way by hurting regular people was not going to be something that Jackson would respond to. So Jackson decided to do something very bold. He began withdrawing all federal money from the Bank of the United States. The reason why this is so significant is because the federal government was the Bank of the United States' biggest customer. So if the government is pulling all their money out of the bank, Jackson pulled the government's money out of the bank, there's really no way that the bank could really survive something like that. So Jackson then had all this government money. They take it out of the bank, and he didn't really have a place to put it. So he decided to start putting all that money in state banks, banks that were called pet banks. And there were 23 of these banks that received federal government money, but a lot of these banks, excuse me, a lot of these banks were very loosely regulated. And the thing is that they now had all this money from the government that Jackson had placed in them. And when banks have lots of money, what they're tempted to do is begin lending out more money. And the more money a bank lends out, what often happens is they start lending money to people who are going to have a hard time paying the money back. So banks began issuing riskier loans. These pet banks, these 23 pet banks, began issuing riskier loans in order to make more money, because now they had all this government money that Jackson had placed in them. So the move was completely counterproductive. These state banks, now flush with cash from the federal government, began issuing loans to people to buy more and more land. And, banks have to be very careful about that, because the thing is that if they lend out too much money, it can threaten their very existence. Because if they start lending money to people who are bad risks, people who might not pay it back, like, I say, I'm going to borrow $1,000 to buy a new piece of land, even though I don't have the income to pay back that $1,000, that's going to be a really big problem. And what made things even worse is Jackson took the federal government money for the Bank of the United States, placed it in these 23 pet banks, and then loosened all federal regulation on the state pet banks. So they basically had more money and less restrictions about what they could do with the money. So that was a recipe for disaster. In fact, this was a major reason why the United States economy ultimately fell into a serious depression in 1837, right after Jackson left office. It was not a good move. Now, because so many people were buying land now, because all these state pet banks had been issuing all these loans to people to buy land. In 1836, Jackson issued something called the Specie Circular. That's SPECIE. Specie is gold or silver. So what the Specie Circular said was that if you want to buy land, you couldn't buy land in paper money. You had to buy land in either gold or silver. And the thing is that most people did not have gold or silver lying around to buy land. So that ultimately contracted the whole economy, because land sales pretty much ground to a halt because people did not have gold or silver to buy the land. So basically all these machinations, pulling the money out of the Bank of the United States, putting in these unregulated pet banks who issued risky loans, then Jackson trying to backtrack and saying, well, if you want to buy land, you have to buy it in gold and silver. All this caused incredible disruption to the American economy and ultimately resulted, again, in a very, very serious economic depression. And also, there were a lot of Americans who were just getting kind of tired of Jackson's high-handed conduct. The fact that Jackson kind of felt like he could just act in such a autocratic, dictatorial way. I showed one class, I didn't show the other class. I'll show you that in the one I did show the PowerPoint to. I'll show you that in our next live class. But to a lot of critics, Jackson was acting monarchical. They called him King Andrew I. After what he had done by withdrawing the money from the Bank of the United States. which is a powerful insult during this time, when memories of the revolution are not that distant. And in 1834, the Senate took an unprecedented action that's never been done before or since. The Senate decided to censure Andrew Jackson for withdrawing all the federal government money from the Bank of the United States. A censure is a very harsh condemnation. It has no practical implication, unlike if you were impeached or removed from office, right? If you could be impeached, you could be kicked out of office. So a censure doesn't have any of those implications, but the thing is, a censure still is a very harsh condemnation that goes on the record, right? So the Senate of the United States is officially condemning the president for conduct they feel was inappropriate. So it was kind of humiliating for Andrew Jackson to be censured. In 1834, a new political party formed to oppose Andrew Jackson. That was the one unifying principle of this new political party. They called themselves the Whig Party, W-H-I-G. Now, not wig like head, not for your hair. The Whigs, the reason they got that name is the Whig Party in England back in the 1700s was the party that supported restrictions on the power of the king. So Jackson's opponent said he's acting like a king, so they called themselves the Whig Party. So let's talk a little bit about the Whig Party. Now, with the Whig Party being formed in 1834, this is usually considered the birth of the second party system. The first party system, of course, was what you learned last year, the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans. So that was long gone. Now we had two new parties that each commanded significant support among different areas of the country. We had this new Whig Party, and then we had Andrew Jackson's Democratic Party. I know what some of you might be thinking. Didn't we have a National Republican Party for a while? The Adams and Clay Party? We did, but because it didn't last very long and never really had that much influence, it's really not considered to be part of a party system per se. So the first party system was in the 1790s and lasted to roughly the late 18 teens between the Federals and the Democratic Republicans. So this was the second party system between the Democrats and the Whig Party. Now, who were the Whigs and what did they believe? Now, the one unifying principle of the new Whig Party was they hated Andrew Jackson. Maybe that's a little strong. They really opposed Andrew Jackson's policies. Thus the name Whig, because they said he's acting like a king. The leader of the Whig Party was Henry Clay. Now remember, Henry Clay had been Jackson's nemesis for years, right? He'd run against him in 1832. They had that whole corrupt bargain situation in the 1820s. So Henry Clay was the leader of the Whig Party. And Clay put a lot of his principles, a lot of the things he believed, he put in the new party. So the Whig Party actually did have principles apart from opposing Andrew Jackson. So let's talk about that. Now, they were a very diverse group, partly because there are a lot of different types of people who didn't like Andrew Jackson. So if you didn't like Andrew Jackson, you became a Whig, but these people might have all sorts of different kinds of beliefs, right? I might hate Jackson, but I'm conservative. I might hate Jackson, but I'm a liberal. So both those groups of people joined the Whig Party, but they brought to the party a very diverse set of beliefs. But as time went on, the Whig Party began to develop a more coherent set of principles. The core belief of the Whig Party was that there has to be strong federal government involvement in the economy. We have to bring back the Bank of the United States. We have to increase tariffs. We have to have high tariffs because that protects, remember we talked about this in class, that protects American industry from foreign competition. And they want to build up American industry. So they believed in the Bank of the United States. They believed in high tariffs. They believed in internal improvements, meaning they thought it was the government's job to actually encourage the building of infrastructure, to build canals, to build roads, to build bridges, all that sort of thing. So the Whig Party believed the government should be actively involved in this. The Whig Party supported industrialization. They believed that the future of America was industry, factories, mills, all of that. More Jeffersonian Jackson types believed in, an agrarian future. They believed that America's future kind of lie in the development of America's farms. The Whigs believed that America's future lies in industrialization and the growth of business. And they believe that the government should actively be encouraging the growth of business. So that was similar to the old Federalists. And remember, Henry Clay's belief system was called the American system, right? That the government should be actively encouraging the growth of business so America would become a modern economy. So the American system of Henry Clay became the core belief of the new Whig Party. But there were other beliefs. The Whig Party tended to have more moralistic views on a lot of cultural issues. Now, a cultural issue like today, a cultural issue would be something like abortion, gay rights, guns, things like that. Because we have, in politics, we have economic issues and we have cultural issues. So on cultural issues, the Whig Party tended to be more conservative. If you were a religious person, you probably were a member, especially of religious. Well, I won't even say that. If you were a religious person, you probably were a member of the Whig Party. Because the Whig Party generally believed, well, people should live more moral lives. Stores should not be open on Sunday, for instance, because you should be at church. The government should have policies that are more consistent with moral Christian principles. People who favored restrictions on drinking, and that became a significantly bigger group as time went on. The temperance folks, they generally were Whigs. So Whigs generally attracted people who are more conservative on personal issues, on cultural issues. Not all Whigs were conservative on moral issues, but most people who were conservative on moral issues were Whigs, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. People who believed in Northerners who believed on restrictions on slavery generally favored the Whig Party. That does not mean that the Whig Party was an abolitionist or an anti-slavery party. It really wasn't, because the Whig Party actually had a substantial Southern wing. There were a lot of Whigs. In fact, probably half the Whig Party was Southern. So it wasn't like the Whig Party was an anti-slavery party, but people who were anti-slavery tended to be Whigs, because the Democrats, in contrast, generally kind of were laissez-faire. They were like, the government really should not be intervening very much in people's lives, and what if people want to have slaves or people don't want to have slaves. So the Democratic Party was really not an attractive option for a lot of people who were against slavery. So people who were against slavery tended to be very sympathetic to the Whig Party, because the Whig Party tended to be more moralistic and more religious. And remember, a lot of people who opposed slavery opposed it because they were very religious, because they felt that slavery violated Christian principles. The Whig Party tended to be skeptical of increased immigration. They tended to believe that, too much immigration kind of, waters down Americanness, if that makes any sense. They felt that a lot of it doesn't make any sense, but like in their mind, they felt that too much immigration is a danger to the country, particularly when the biggest immigrant group at this time, and as we get into the 1840s and 1850s, was the Irish. The Irish were Catholic, and the Whig Party reflected Protestant morality, so they did not like the Catholic Church. Also, the Whig Party tended to be more skeptical of drinking, and there were this old stereotype that the Irish were big drinkers. So they tended to oppose increased immigration, which is a big reason why when immigrants did come to the United States, they tended to be a lot more supportive of the Democratic Party than they were of the Whig Party. But this isn't true for all Whigs. Not all Whigs were anti-immigrant. But I guess the same thing I said about anti-slavery and about moralistic things, people with moralistic views. People who were not all Whigs were against immigration, but people who were against immigration tended to be Whigs, because they felt that immigration was a threat to Protestant values. Now, some of the Whig Party principles were actually kind of Jackson specific. They generally favored a limited presidency. They said that Congress really should be the strongest part of our government. So they believed in kind of congressional government. They believed in limiting the veto power. Because remember, Jackson believed that the veto could be used on anything he disagreed with. That was a newer interpretation. Most presidents, in fact, every president before Jackson believed that the president can only veto bills if they're unconstitutional. Jackson had an expanded view. He said, "I'm the president. I'm the only one who represents all the people. So the thing is that I should veto things I don't agree with." The Whig Party generally favored restrictions on that, and they also favored a one-term presidency because they said that if a president could serve 2 terms, he could get too powerful. So those are John Jackson specific principles of the Whig Party, but ones they actually kept even after Jackson had left politics. Now, the areas that supported the Whigs very strongly was the industrial Northeast, New England. The New England states really supported the Whig Party. Upstate New York supported the Whig Party. The Midwest, states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, tended to be Whiggish. One of the reasons for that is we haven't talked about this yet, but a lot of the people who settled in the Midwest, what they used to call the Old Northwest, again, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, states like that, tended to be people whose roots were in New England. So a lot of people moved from New England and went to these states, and they brought a lot of their values with them. So often these areas, the Northeast of the country, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and states like that, have similar, at least during this time, had similar political beliefs as states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio, because they tended to be the same type of people. The people from New England moved to those states and populated them. So they often brought their political beliefs with them. So the Midwest, like New England, tended to be very supportive of the Whig Party. Upper class Southerners, farmers who had more money, people who were the planter class, people who, own large amounts of land in the South tend to be supportive of the Whigs because they kind of supported the whole idea that the government should be actively encouraging business. So a lot of merchants, bankers in the South supported the Whig Party. So that's the reason I hesitate to say the Whigs were the anti-slavery party, because they weren't. The Whigs had a lot of slave owners. Henry Clay, the founder of the Whig Party, himself was a slave owner. So then many, many Southern slave owners belonged to the Whig Party. So it would be wrong to call them an anti-slavery party. It's just that people in the North who were anti-slavery tend to be attracted to the Whigs. But ultimately, this turned into the thing that ultimately killed the Whig Party in the 1850s, that they had these divides between anti-slavery Northerners and slave-owning or pro-slavery Southerners. Ultimately, the party just could not continue with those type of divisions, and that happened in the 1850s. So we'll talk about that in a couple of months probably. Religious Protestants who want to reform society tended to be Whigs. So people who believe that there should be limits on drinking, as we said, people who believe there should be public education, that the government should actively be encouraging people to live more morally, were Whigs. So basically people who wanted the government to be more involved in things, wanting the government to be involved in encouraging business, wanted the government to kind of have you live a more moral life. Generally, people who favored a bigger government role in those things supported the Whig Party. Nullificationists supported the Whig Party because they hated Andrew Jackson, because of what Andrew Jackson did to South Carolina, threatening to use force unless they paid the tariff. There was an important group. We didn't talk about this in class, but there's a group that would emerge in the early 1830s called the anti-masons. The Masons are a secret society of men. It's just basically it's a group of guys who hang out and have kind of unusual rituals. But it's a secret society. Nobody really knows what's going on in Mason meetings apart from Masons. So they're subject to an enormous amount of conspiracy theories and all sorts of notions about strange things that happen in Mason meetings and how the Masons secretly control things from behind the scenes. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories attached to the Masons. A Mason had threatened in 1826 to divulge all the secrets of the Masons, and he disappeared. So after that, this anti-Mason feeling became stronger in the United States, and also a feeling that secret societies are very undemocratic. That a country like the United States, which is an open democracy, in our way of thinking about ourselves. So secret societies just have no place in an open democracy. So an anti-Mason movement emerged in the 1830s, formed a brief political party actually, but was ultimately absorbed into the new Whig party. So like a lot of these people who were anti-Mason ultimately joined the Whig party. So that's the Whigs. And the Whigs, like, I'll be honest, like if I was alive during this time, I would have been a Whig. I would have been a strong Whig. I'm not really down with being conservative on a lot of those cultural issues, but basically the Whig Party had I wrote my college thesis on this actually for my history major, the rise and fall of the Whig Party, because I just think the Whig Party vision that the government should be actively encouraging industrialization, it was a very modern vision, and one that ultimately, when it was adopted decades later, actually helped the United States become what we became. A modern, the most industrialized, richest country in the world. So I think the vision of the Whig Party was a very future-oriented vision. Now, the Democratic Party of Andrew Jackson still held those old-fashioned Jeffersonian beliefs. They favored a smaller federal government. They believed in states' rights. They generally believe the government should have much less role in things. The government really should not be actively encouraging business. The government really should not be telling you how to live your personal life, which is another reason why the Democratic Party back then was attracted to a lot of immigrants who were tired of governments in their home countries telling them how to live. So they liked the Democratic message, just live however you want, do whatever you want on Sunday. It's really none of my business. They also kind of supported a vision of America of being an agrarian vision of yeoman farmers, basically, making their living from the earth. And they kind of romanticized the whole ideal of farming. And they were skeptical of business. So the Whigs were saying we should be actively encouraging business. The Democrats generally said, well, should we really be doing that? First of all, we should be emphasizing the agrarian nature of the rural nature of our society, first of all. And second of all, like business, factories rip people off. They pay people poor wages. They don't treat people right. So why should we be encouraging business? One theory about why Jackson was so popular and the Democrats were popular, during the 1830s was, I read a book about this where they said that, well, so many people were so skeptical, so fearful of the rise of big business, the rise of factories and mills, that Jackson was almost this reassuring presence because he kind of advocated a more old-fashioned agrarian vision for the country. That was very, very interesting, that thesis. The Democrats tended to attract the support of a majority of Southerners. Most poor farmers, that's a majority of Southerners, supported the Democratic Party. A key part of the Democratic Party coalition were urban workers, factory workers in big cities, particularly New York City, who kind of viewed the growth of business as a threat. So they were also attracted to the Democratic Party, which basically was the party of poor people, the party of not all poor people, but the party of poor farmers and the party of poor urban workers. Interestingly, now the Democratic Party is still, at least seen by most as the party of the working class, the party of the poor, but they generally favor bigger government, right? They want the government to be more involved in trying to help poor people. But back then, poor people tended to believe that the government should be smaller because they said, well, when government does get involved in things, it tends to just help the rich. The Democrats believed in low tariffs and things like that. They didn't want to change people's moral behavior at all. So by 1836, within 2 years of the Whig Party being founded, the country was pretty much split down the middle between the Democrats and the Whigs. So that's amazing. The Whig Party actually garnered so much support after 2 years of existence. And I think a big part of that was because there was building up in the country. There were a lot of people just getting tired of Andrew Jackson and all his antics. So I think that was like a really big reason why the Whig Party became so powerful. And it had an appealing message, agree or disagree, but it's a message that definitely attracted a lot of Americans. The country was split down the middle, but there was a slight edge to the Democrats. So I won't say it was a 50-50 country by 1836 into the 1840s. It was more 51-52 Democrat, 48-49 Whig divide. in American society as we get into the 1830s and 1840s. A two-party system with a slight edge to the Democrats. All right, guys. So thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this. Make sure you watch from start to finish. It is very, very important. I'm going to post Jackson's veto message on Google Classroom tomorrow, as promised. I'll also post your first assignment, where you do reading and outlining of the textbook pages I give you, and those will be, and that you can access that those from that link that I sent you on Jupiter Grades a couple of days ago. All right. So have a great weekend, and our next video will be on Wednesday, and then I'll see you on Friday. No, I'll see you on Thursday for our next live class. All right. Until then.